Couple of years ago, I had a teen client who lived for internet rabbit holes, loved researching, loved high interest topics, could lose 4 hours to one Wikipedia tangent. So when his grade 9 teacher assigned him an open inquiry project, pick anything you want, this should have been a dream. But instead, he froze like so many other ADHD teens in the same situation. And today I want to talk a bit about why. We are talking about executive functioning in ADHD today. Hey there, welcome to the Behavior Coach Podcast. I am Erica Nielsen Mahoney, an ADHD coach, educator, and doctoral student. I help families understand the nervous systems behind the behavior, and I'm also raising two neurodivergent kids of my own. So the things we talk about here come from research, from my professional work with families, and from real life inside a neurodivergent home. This podcast is the audio version of the work I have been doing for years through writing, coaching, and teaching, turned into conversations you can take with you, because sometimes you don't need another article. You just need something thoughtful in your ears while you're driving, walking the dog, or folding the never-ending laundry. Let's get into it. If you have ever watched your child stare at something they can absolutely do, knowing that they have the cognitive capacity for it, knowing they will likely love it once they get going, but they just can't start, they can't finish, they can't find the thing that they need, they can't remember the thing you just told them, then this episode is for you. We are talking all about executive functioning. And executive functioning is one of the most impacted areas in an ADHD individual. What I want to start with up front is to state that struggling with executive functioning is not laziness, and it is not a character flaw. This is not your child not trying. It is one of the most documented neurological differences in ADHD. ADHD kids, their executive functions are working overtime in a brain that simply does not have the same chemical and structural support for these functions that a neurotypical brain has. Dr. Russell Barkley, an ADHD researcher, uses this thing called the 30% rule, and we are going to talk about that today. In his research, what he states is that children with ADHD lag behind their same age peers in executive functioning by approximately 30%. That is 3 to 6 years behind, depending on how old your kid is. This gap kind of increases and increases until we hit somewhere between 4 to 6 years, and then that gap starts to slow. It never closes, but it does decrease. What this means is that a 10-year-old with ADHD is operating with the executive functioning of about a 7-year-old, a 15-year-old more like a 10 or 11-year-old, and this has nothing to do with intelligence or cognitive capacity. This is executive functioning capacity. ADHD is not connected to IQ. This is about getting things done. Let's talk about what executive functions are. Executive functioning is an umbrella term. It is a term that describes a number of functions that our brains do. How many areas of executive functioning they are and what they are called varies country to country and researcher to researcher. For this episode and in all of the work I do, workshops I teach, I use 8 areas because they map well onto what parents are actually seeing in their homes and teachers are seeing in their classrooms. I'm going to walk through each one quickly today, and I'm going to slow down on a couple of them, working memory and impulsivity in particular, because these are ones that often really impact kids and families. Let's start with inhibitory control. So we're going to list out all 8 here. Inhibitory control, which is sometimes just called impulsivity, is the ability to pause between thought and action, and we're going to come back to this one. Cognitive flexibility is our ability to cope with change and the unexpected. A classic example of this is that your child has planned to lounge on the couch all Saturday, and then you tell them that we are actually running to the grocery store as a family. The reaction to that change, the inability to cope with that unexpected change would be a struggle in the area of cognitive flexibility. Transitions live here too, and transitions are typically hard for kids with ADHD, and that is normal and expected. Emotional regulation is the next one. This is the ability to notice, name, and modulate emotions. The emotional experience of ADHD is big and intense and can be sticky. And it is its own whole conversation, which is why I've already given Overwhelm its own podcast episode, and I will have another episode on emotional regulation itself. But what I want you to know about emotional regulation in the context of executive functioning is that the ability to regulate emotions, to move smoothly from one emotion to another without getting stuck, is our ability to emotionally regulate. And that is an area that is hard for kids with ADHD. Self-monitoring is the next one. This is our ability to be aware of ourselves in real time. What I notice with ADHD over and over is brilliant, intuitive self-reflection after the fact, but that it is much harder to notice it in the actual moment. And that is a gap where often a lot of rumination for kids, teens, and adults with ADHD lives. That in the moment, it's really hard to self-monitor, but after we can recall perfectly what other people's body language looked like or how we were responding in the moment. Organization is the next one. This is arranging thoughts and tasks and objects in a way that makes sense. And one thing I always want to reinforce here is that organization is not just about stuff. It is also about communication. That zigzag storyteller in your house, the one who tells you the middle, then the ending, and then circles back to the beginning, that's organization too. It's not just the things. And then time management or time blindness. This one is huge in ADHD. The way that we feel about time as ADHDers is different. When we are bored, time can crawl. When we are interested, time flies. And we can lose track of anything that is not concrete. A classic example of this is a teen who knows that the walk to school is 15 minutes. And so they will leave themselves exactly 15 minutes every single day, completely forgetting that they're going to need to go pee and find their water bottle and find their keys and realize that lunch is still on the counter halfway out the door. And that this happens every single day. All of that takes probably another 15 minutes often is not concrete and therefore doesn't count. For adults, this is looking up Google Maps, seeing, oh yeah, it takes 20 minutes to get there, leaving ourselves exactly 20 minutes and forgetting that we are going to need to park and go up 11 stories in an elevator when we arrive. Time for ADHD brains often only counts when it's concrete, so we need to make these in-between times concrete. The next one is task-based. This is planning, initiating, and monitoring tasks. This is the getting started, the decision-making, the knowing when you are done part. This is where that inquiry project I shared at the beginning lives, and we will come back to that too. And then finally, working memory. And this is the one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. Working memory is such an area of impact for so many individuals with ADHD. Working memory is our temporary storage system. I like to use the image of sticky notes to describe this. I want you to imagine all of the thoughts you hold at one time as sticky notes sort of stuck to your forehead. A neurotypical teen can hold a handful, maybe 5 sticky notes, all in there nicely. That means if someone gives them a multi-step, 4 steps, for example, to complete, they can stick all of those on their sticky notes and proceed through them. A child or teen with ADHD can hold maybe 1 or 2 sticky notes at a time, maybe 3 if we're lucky. And then the glue is also not very good, which means your ADHDer is out there dropping and losing their sticky notes all over the place. And here is what makes it extra stressful for our ADHD kids. If all of their sticky notes are full and a new thought is coming in, like a new piece of information is being presented to them by a teacher or a parent, they either have to stop listening and engaging so that they don't lose the sticky notes that they already have, or they have to drop a sticky note and replace it with a new one, which means that by taking on that new thought, they are dropping off something else. And this is really hard and stressful. And working memory is interesting because the stress of it is so big. We see all kinds of coping patterns built around it. A really common one is that the brain combines the stress about losing thoughts with impulsivity. Our smart ADHD brains have learned that I lose thoughts and I do not want to lose this one. It feels important and I have to give it a home right now, which means that our ADHD kids in particular will blurt out. They will interrupt you when you are clearly busy because they have a thought and they need to give it a home because they know they are going to lose it. And this is a perspective shift that I want to give to parents. When your ADHD child blurts or interrupts, they are not being intentionally rude. They are not failing to listen. They are usually having a stress response and they are trying to keep something that they have decided is important front and center in their brain. Our goal for supporting working memory is always to externalize the function. Notepads, note apps, whiteboards. Our goal in general with executive functioning is to try to externalize our executive functions. Working memory is a great example of this. We want to get those thoughts into a home somewhere out of our heads, in a notepad, on a whiteboard. Even a parent can hold the thought for their kid. Anywhere outside the brain that takes the load off is ideal. Now, let's talk a little bit more about impulsivity. Impulsivity is what we call it when the brain skips the gap between stimulus and response. The thought arrives, action happens, no pause. So this is interrupting and blurting, which we just talked about. It is also touching the displays at a store, even when they've had the don't touch the displays in the store conversation. Lying is another one, lying in the moment and then coming clean later. Impulsive snacking, spending, promises, an impulsive yes when the calendar is already full. In adults, this can often show up as agreeing to things in a hot second and then dreading them. And the thing that I really want parents to hear is that impulsivity often gets read as not thinking, not caring, or not respecting a rule. But the rule is often there and the child knows the rule. What did not happen is the pause between the rule and the action. And when we're supporting impulsivity in our ADHD kids, the thing we are often building is the skill to stop and to think and then to choose. Now that we have looked at all of our executive functions individually, what I want to talk about next is the fact that executive functions work as a team. They almost never work in isolation. And I want to show you what that means with a real example. I want you to picture a 10-year-old boy with ADHD. He has a 3-page math assignment for homework. He had a 20-minute lesson at school today on the topic, and he now has an assignment that is a mix of multi-step word problems and basic calculations, and he is sitting at your kitchen table about to start on his homework. What I want us to do right now is look at how many executive functions he needs to access just to do this. Currently, in order to be successful, he has to hold back the impulse to just write down an answer before working through the actual steps. He has to resist the urge to get up for a snack or join the conversation his parents are having in the kitchen. He has to keep the different steps of the problem in his head while also trying to remember all of the math rules that he was just taught earlier today. He has to get started without procrastinating, even though the work is hard. He has to break each problem into manageable chunks and decide which ones to tackle and decide if he needs to ask for help. That's self-monitoring. He has to manage real frustration when the problems are difficult and try to stay calm when he makes a mistake. That's emotional regulation. He also has to cope with the fact that he thought there was less homework left and he cannot relax like he was hoping, cognitive flexibility. He also has to shift his approach when one method does not work and shift between problem types, more flexibility. And he has to keep track of his sheet, his book, his pencil, get it done, get it in his backpack, and get it handed in tomorrow, which is all organization. And he has to pace himself so he gets it done before dinner. That is every single executive function that I've talked about in this episode already, all at once, to do one math assignment. So when your child is melting down over homework, this is what is usually happening. Their nervous system, just looking at this assignment, is running through every single function at the same time in a brain where every single one of these skills is lagging, and they're likely already exhausted from school. And so they see all of this, they know their capacity is low, and sometimes they just freeze or they yawn or they lay their head on the table and moan because executive functions are exhausting for the ADHD brain. Let me share a couple more stories. So let's go back to the teen I told you about at the beginning of this episode, the one who loves the rabbit holes, like so many ADHDers. I love the rabbit holes. He was given an open inquiry assignment. Pick anything you want, research it, share what you find. And on paper, our smart, curious ADHD kids should just crush this. But this kid could not pick a topic. He got overwhelmed by the infinite options. He could not figure out where to start. He couldn't break it down. The exact assignment that should have lit up his brain shut him down completely because the executive functioning load was huge. Picking from infinite options is a huge decision-making hurdle. Breaking a giant abstract project into steps requires planning and pacing. Knowing what to do first is task initiation. Holding all of the pieces involves working memory. He has the cognitive capability to do every component of this project, but unless he has a structure to lean in, the dream assignment will become an impossible one to a kid or a teen with ADHD. Now I'm going to share a little bit of a story from my own childhood, my own executive functioning journey. I have ADHD, as I've shared on this podcast before, and the way that I coped for years and years and years, because I wasn't diagnosed until adulthood, was perfectionism. I would do a lot of double checking, triple checking, building these elaborate systems that looked very impressive, but then not actually successfully maintain them over time. The maintenance was the part that truly crushed me. Here is the one thing that I think about a lot and have used this example in workshops and with clients: my childhood bookshelf. I literally labeled each of my books with little stickers on the spine, sorted alphabetically by the author's last name, like a tiny library in my bedroom, completely over-organized for a kid. While meanwhile, I could not keep my clothes off the floor for the life of me. When I went to university, my first 2 years, I lived buried in things. The systems that I would attempt to build for myself were often so overcomplicated that the maintenance would immediately collapse the moment my life got busy. Now I do the opposite. Simple structures, minimal barriers, whatever has the fewest decisions to start and the fewest steps to maintain becomes the system, because my brain does not need a beautiful bookshelf. It needs a system that I can actually keep up with. Let's take a little bit of time before we close today on a few of my favorite strategies. Our core strategy is to externalize our executive functions. Executive functions live inside the brain, where ADHD makes them hard. And so a core support strategy is to get them out of the brain. I often say that ADHDers need a prop or person to function well. And so many of you listening right now, if you are an ADHD parent, this is the moment where you might realize that you have been your child's executive functioning support human all of these years. What I want to share today is that you don't have to hold all of their executive functions. We can start to use props. A prop would be a notebook holding a list, a timer reminding them when to switch tasks, a digital calendar holding the week. Our goal as our kids get bigger is to start offloading some of the things that we hold for them, all of those reminders, the checking in, the remembering all of the things for our kid. We want to start helping them use tools so that you aren't it, because often you also have to hold your own executive functions, and holding your own executive functions and the executive functions of a whole other human or multiple humans is overwhelming. And so our goal is to slowly offload some of that to props. In my own home, I lean heavily on visuals. I have a digital calendar that my kids can use and see. I use the Skylight calendar. This is not sponsored, but it's great. It has been game-changing for our family. I'll drop a link below. I think I might have an affiliate link. I also use a visual meal plan that I create on AI and print it off and put it on the fridge every week so that any family member can help share the load of remembering what needs to defrost from the freezer and can start preparing dinner based on availability, not just living inside my head where it used to live. And then second strategy after externalizing is predictability. If you're not sure where to start with predictability. I have an entire episode on rhythms and routines from a couple weeks ago. These weekly rhythms, daily routines, having transitions that have been practiced and rehearsed really supports working memory, time management, decision-making, emotional regulation, cognitive flexibility, basically everything that we just talked about. When life is predictable, your child just doesn't have to lean as hard on their executive functions because the structure is doing some of the work for them. Next core strategy is to match expectations to ability and developmental readiness. We want to use that 30% rule that I mentioned earlier to check in with ourselves before we ask things of our child. Often we will ask things of our child based on what we see their same age peers able to do, or an idea we have of what our kids should be able to do in grade 7 or 8 or 9. I see this a lot in the middle school years. Well, in grade 9, they should be able to remember to do XYZ chore every single day. Would a child 30% younger be successful at remembering this every single day? If the answer is no, then likely we need to add in some supports. It is normal and expected to need to support these executive functions at that 30% younger rate for our ADHDers, particularly in the teen years. And then my last strategy, I call it naming it in the wild. This is a small daily practice that I love. When your child is struggling with an executive function, name it out loud or in your head or to your partner. Whew, that is a hard cognitive flexibility moment. Or working memory is really maxed out right now. Or wow, we're having a hard time management morning. Naming it does two things. It builds our own empathy in the moment as parents because it reminds ourselves that this is brain stuff, not bad kid stuff. And over time, your child picks up the language too, which means that they get to name what they are experiencing instead of feeling like they are just failing repeatedly. Kids with ADHD are brilliant, in my experience, as someone who talks to ADHD kids and teens all the time. They are funny and creative and smart and sparkly. They have so much to share with the world. And what we are doing when we support their executive functions are taking the load off so that all of those things can actually come through. Our goal is not to fix anything. We just want to relieve pressure. Your action item, because I always like to end with an action item, is just one thing. Pick one executive function from what we talked about today, the one you think is really hard in your house right now, and start naming it in the wild. Not lecturing your kid about it, just name it quietly with empathy. The strategies come after. The shift starts with just kind of naming it. Next week, we are doing something a little bit different. I have a guest joining me. I have a guest named Faith. She is from Bellicon, which is my absolute favorite rebounder company. They make the rebounder I have in my own home, and we are going to talk all about regulating the nervous system through movement. Movement is such a powerful tool for ADHD and ADHD brains and bodies, and I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. I will see you there. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. If this episode gave you something, a new way to think about what's happening in your home, a moment where you felt a little less alone in this, I would love for you to share it with someone who might need it too. Until next time, take care of yourself. You are doing harder work than most people understand, and you're showing up for it. That matters.